This happened back in the late 2000s when I was in my early 20s, living as a broke but happy expat in Berlin. One night, my British roommate and I were coming back from seeing a band. It was around midnight, maybe 1 in the morning. We weren't wasted, just tipsy, loud, and in a great mood. We were walking toward a subway entrance at the far end of a long, quiet street. The air was misty, warm enough to still feel good outside, and the streetlights threw these hazy yellow halos over the pavement. Leaves were blowing across the ground in little gusts of wind. Then we noticed someone ahead of us, a small, stooped figure in the fog. At first, it looked like an older woman, dragging one leg behind her with a deep, exaggerated limp. She had bags in both hands, and her whole posture was bent and twisted. We were just about to walk around her when she suddenly shouted in English but with a thick German accent, "Help! Won't somebody help me?" The tone caught me off guard. It didn't sound scared. It sounded demanding, like she expected us to stop. I slowed down. My roommate didn't. She actually tried to keep me moving, but I couldn't just walk past an elderly woman struggling like that. I asked what she needed. She said, "It's my leg! Help me carry the bags! I live just over there!" She nodded toward an apartment building about half a block up. Without thinking, I said we'd help. As we walked with her, we passed under a street light. That's when I really saw her face. She looked straight out of a grim fairy tale. Hunched back, gray, straggly hair, pale skin, a long nose with a dark wart, wearing dark wool clothes with a hood. It actually made me flinch for a second. But I forced myself to ignore it. She was just an old woman. That's what I kept telling myself. When we reached her building, the front door was already cracked open, which was unusual for the area. She suddenly moved faster, pushing the door wide with more strength than she'd shown before. She gestured for me to go in first. Then she pointed up a narrow stairwell bathed in weak yellow light and whispered, "Just up the stairs, just up the stairs." I stood there in the entryway, frozen. Something was wrong. Every hair on my body stood up. The air smelled stale and smoky. At the top of the stairs, a door was slightly open, just a sliver into an apartment. I wanted to be polite. I wanted to help, but something deep in my gut screamed no. It felt like too much like a horror movie scene, the kind of moment that's so cliché you almost convince yourself it can't be real. I actually laughed a little under my breath at how absurd it looked. That's when my roommate snapped. She yelled, "Oh, hell no!" She grabbed my arm and yanked me backward out of the doorway so fast I almost dropped the bag. She practically dragged me back down the street. Behind us, the old woman shouted something in a disappointed, angry voice, like she was furious we were leaving. We didn't stop until we were inside the bright, crowded subway station. Only then did my roommate tell me what went through her head. First, she was convinced the old woman wasn't limping at all until we got close. She swore the limp was fake. Second, and this chilled me more than anything, she said that as I stood in a doorway, she suddenly saw something in her mind, like a flash. A man, an older son, standing at the top of the stairs behind that slightly open door, waiting. She said she knew with absolute certainty that if I walked up those steps, I wasn't coming back down. Was it paranoia? Alcohol? Just a weird old woman? I'll never know. But I still feel grateful for her instincts pulling me away from that staircase. And to this day, I'm convinced something or someone was waiting up there.
I live in a rural neighborhood with a big feral cat population. I've always kept food and water out for them on my deck, part compassion, part habit. By now, I'm used to hearing the occasional raccoon, possum, or the thump of a cat jumping up for a midnight snack. Last spring, I woke up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom. The bathroom window looks directly down over the deck, so while I was sitting there half asleep, I glanced out of instinct. There was something big crouched at one of the bowls. At first, I didn't think twice. The lighting was dim, just a faint glow from the garage. My brain automatically sorted it into something normal. A raccoon, maybe, or a really big cat, possibly even a coyote. But then my eyes adjusted a little more. And as the shape sharpened, I felt this cold, sinking drop straight through my stomach. It wasn't an animal. It was a man. A grown man, crouched on all fours, eating cat food out of the bowl with his mouth. No hands, just bent over, face in the dish, chewing. I whisper yelled for my husband, not quite screaming, but the kind of panicked hiss you make when every instinct tells you something is wrong. He got up immediately, no questions asked, and rushed into the bathroom. I pointed out the window, unable to find words. He looked out, squinting, and I watched his face go through the exact same steps mine did. Confusion, recognition, and then horror. He whispered, "What the hell?" I grabbed my phone and called 911. The dispatcher asked what I meant by a suspicious man, and I had to actually say it out loud. There is a grown man on all fours eating cat food off my deck, like with his mouth. There was a long pause, and then the dispatcher said he'd send a patrol car right away. While I stayed at the window, barely breathing, my husband tiptoed downstairs to grab a baseball bat. I kept watching the man, but he wasn't moving. He wasn't even reacting. His hood was pulled low, hiding his face completely. He stayed in that same hunched-over position, almost statue-like, as if he was frozen in the middle of eating or waiting for something. The longer I watched him, the more unnerving he became. He didn't seem drunk. He didn't sway. He didn't wobble. He just crouched, perfectly still. 5 or 6 minutes passed, though it felt like hours, before I saw headlights rolling slowly down our road. The man must have noticed them too. Without a single twitch of alarm, he simply rose to his feet.
Many years ago, when my son was only 3, he went through a phase that I still struggle to think about without getting chills. It started as night terrors, violent, extreme ones, and eventually morphed into sleepwalking. At that age, he wasn't very articulate yet, so he could never explain what scared him. And strangely, during the day, he wasn't afraid of his room at all. Every night, he'd trot off to bed on his own, sneakers neatly placed beside his mattress, tucked under his blankets like nothing was wrong. We eventually discovered that if he slept in bed with us, the terrors didn't happen. So for weeks, we squeezed into our bed, a cramped little pile of limbs, but it was better than listening to him scream in the dark. But right when we thought we'd found a fix, the sleepwalking began. One night, half asleep, I felt him climb over me. I assumed he was heading to the bathroom. I barely opened my eyes before drifting off again. Seconds later, his terrified screams jolted me awake. He was nowhere in the room. My husband found him next to his own bed, shaking violently, eyes blown wide and unfocused, staring at something we couldn't see. We carried him back to our room, held him until he calmed and waited for him to fall asleep again. Nights like that became routine, not constant but frequent enough to leave us exhausted and jumpy. Then my mother brought someone to the house, a woman she knew, a curandera, a type of folk healer or witch doctor. She claimed our home was full of negative energy left behind by previous tenants. She said restless spirits of small children had attached themselves to our son. Hearing that made every hair on my body rise. We dealt with strange things in that house, but nothing more frightening than what was happening to him. She performed a cleansing ritual. And after that, the night terror stopped. But the rest of the house? It changed, and not for the better. Suddenly, we were hearing knocks from inside the walls, doors opening by themselves, pictures flying off walls without warning, doors slamming shut just as we reached them with no one on the other side to touch them. We saw a shadow, the clear silhouette of a man walking from room to room, but when we checked outside, there was nobody anywhere near the house. We were terrified to let our son sleep in his own room again, so he stayed with us. Then came the night that broke us. My husband and I had the same nightmare. I woke up drenched in sweat, screaming. He woke up at the same time, gasping for air. And when we described our dreams to each other, they were almost identical. In my dream, we were across the street talking to our neighbors when they pointed at our house, completely engulfed in black smoke. Through the front bay window, I saw my son pounding his fists against the glass, crying for help. We sprinted across the road into the burning house. In my dream, I found him, scooped him up, and raced outside, only to realize the weight in my arms wasn't him. It was his baby blanket. I turned around just in time to see the house collapse in flames. In my husband's dream, he ran inside the smoke-filled house looking for our son. He could hear him calling, faint but desperate. He grabbed him, held him tight, and ran outside, only to realize he was holding a teddy bear. Both dreams ended the same way. Both dreams took place in the same burning house. Both dreams ended with us failing to save our son. That was the breaking point. We moved out immediately and stayed in my parents' cramped guest room until we could sell the house. We didn't want to lie to the buyer, even though our realtor told us not to say anything. When the man buying it, an older landlord, asked why we were selling it, we told him everything. He brushed it off as nervous nonsense. To this day, I hope he was right, but part of me still wonders if those restless spirits stayed, and what they're doing now that there's no child to chase.